Dr. Dan's Freedom Forum is on the air.
Good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Dan, and this is Freedom Forum Live. Stream Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern on Facebook, YouTube, X, and Rumble. Tonight, a company called Flock Safety has quietly built a network of over 100,000 AI-powered cameras across more than 5,000 municipalities. These are not traffic cameras. They are automated license plate readers, APLRs, powered by artificial intelligence, and they catalog the make, model, color, license plate number, bumper stickers, and even scratches on every vehicle that passes. That data goes into a national database available to any law enforcement agency with a Flock contract. In just a matter of keystrokes, officers can chart a person's full movement across a city over a specific time frame with almost no restrictions or oversight. What could possibly go wrong with that system? You probably didn't vote to be surveilled, and you weren't served with a valid search warrant signed by a judge. But it is happening anyway, in spite of constitutional requirements that prohibit searches and seizures unless a warrant has been issued, and I quote the Fourth Amendment, upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. What is this about? One word: control. A decade ago, I compiled a list of what a dictator needs to control the world: private property, energy, food and water, information and the media, education of the youth, individual privacy, healthcare, personal mobility, and the use of deadly force. Dictators commonly use fear as the most effective tool to control people. They create a terrifying problem and then promote government as the only hope to protect and rescue the population from harm. On November 9th, 2020, the British rapper, author, and political commentator Zuby posted this quote on Twitter: "Forget right and left for a moment. The real battle is between people who want to be left alone and those who refuse to leave other people alone. Always has been, always will be." Zuby's statement is essentially a modern, plain spoken summary of a long held libertarian tradition. Peaceful people should be free, while government exists primarily to prevent one person from using force against another. Here's my personal version of that principle, which I have used in numerous writings and videos. Do you want to live in peace with others? I have 3 rules. Live and let live. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And don't hurt anyone and don't take their stuff. APLRs, flock cameras, are promoted as a tool to capture and incarcerate all criminals. Without blinking an eye, a sheriff can say, if you aren't guilty, you have nothing to worry about. And people, believing themselves to be totally innocent and trusting the government to protect their own personal data, ignorantly oblige the power-hungry dictators and their enforcers by allowing their freedom to be stolen. Once such information is stored in a national database, it is available without your knowledge or approval to anyone with legal or illegal access. Guilt or innocence is no longer a consideration. Your privacy and rights in judicial proceedings are protected by the Constitution. A bunch of government entities didn't get the message. H.L. Mencken said the whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of which are imaginary. An informed population with a knowledge of history is a dictator's nightmare and the guarantor of our constitutional rights. True patriots shed their fears as our founders did and are willing to risk everything for freedom, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. I challenge all of you to get off the sofa. Absolute protection of our constitutional rights is a hill worth dying on. Resist tyranny and trust in freedom. My guest on Freedom Forum tonight is Matthew Cavanaugh of the Cato Institute. Matthew summarized the constitutional issues with flock cameras in his blog post on the Fourth Circuit case, Schmidt versus the City of Norfolk, which involves APLRs. So you know who Matthew is. Matthew is the director of the Cato Institute's Project on Criminal Justice. His work concerns the rights of the accused and jurors, government accountability, and the Second Amendment. Matthew Cavanaugh, welcome as a guest on Freedom Forum Live.
Thank you very much for having me here, Dr. Dan, to talk about flock cameras and the surveillance state as it exists in 2026.
Well, let's have at it, Matthew, because you're the expert on this. You've been involved in this. Give us a rundown of what they are, what they're doing, and what the Constitution says about this.
So folks may notice as they're driving along roadways, these little black boxes. They're up at intersections, they're on utility poles, sometimes they're on stoplights, sometimes they're just on the side of the road. What they're doing is they are copying down information, they're recording information about every vehicle that passes by. Like you said, Dr. Dan, they're checking for everything from bumper stickers to make and model, scratches on the car, even who is driving or riding within them. What they're doing is they're creating vehicle fingerprints or unique identification for vehicles that are passing by. And then later on, a police officer can go in, access these databases, and find out the entire track that a vehicle moved on over a period of time. So it's a way to, without having unmarked cars tooling around town following people, nevertheless get a complete picture of where they've been over a period of time. And these are everywhere. You said over 100,000 cameras. The latest count as of today from DFlock, which is a monitoring group, is over 130,000 flock cameras and ALPRs nationwide. These are being used by thousands upon thousands of agencies. More than 5,000 agencies have these, and they're on over 80,000 street corners throughout the United States. So this is a part of a national patchwork of surveillance, and these communicate with other devices. They use AI in order to consume data that no human being could. There's so much that we can talk about tonight about these devices.
You know, it's really amazing. I mean, this concept is Big Brother watching you to the nth degree. The fact that they could, well, what do they need the information? What are your bumper stickers going to tell them? Well, obviously, they know what your political feelings are if they can read your bumper stickers. How about being able to see who is actually in the car? This is not anything. This is not the government's business, is it, Matthew? I mean, how could this possibly be in any way constitutional?
As early as 2012, NYPD was actually using these to track who was going to mosques throughout New York City. So you're absolutely right. There are political, religious, other angles here. Of course, what bumper stickers you have on your car say something about you. So does where you're going, who you're going to for medical treatment, whose residences you're visiting, what churches or synagogues or mosques you go to, when you go to the library, right? All of this is information that the government wants to have access to. Now, I am not totally against this technology. There are times and places when this can be an important tool for public safety. There have been kidnappings that have been interrupted by this stuff. But just like any super powerful tool, there have to be good safeguards on it because the technology is not perfect and neither are the people using it. To turn to the people here, of course, the government's always going to point to some kidnapping that's in progress, a ticking bomb that's about to go off, but 41 police officers have been charged with crimes for accessing this data for wrongful purposes. That includes stalking ex-partners, stalking people that they find attractive, harassing people. One officer actually entered her ex's information in over 100 times after they broke up. So we need safeguards, we need oversight, and we, the public, deserve to know what this technology is being used for and who can access it under what circumstances.
Well, Matthew, you raise a very interesting point. We live in a digital age, and you know full well that in a digital age, this information is available instantaneously. So, what possible safeguards can there be? Because the minute your data is in the flock system, the very millisecond it's in the flock system, that's technically available to anyone for illegal or unauthorized means. Isn't that true?
It is true, and it's true that this technology all talks to each other too. So you've got a flock cam out there watching what vehicles are passing by. You might also have a shot spotter system, which listens for suspicious or loud noises in neighborhoods. You might then have a stingray device or another way where the government is monitoring what cell phones are in an area. All of these things talk to each other. Now, it used to be the case that no matter how much data was collected, you had a limited amount of storage space on the computers, and you had a limited amount of human manpower that you could dedicate to looking through all of it, to sifting through it, to putting together a full picture. That's not the case anymore. We've got data centers going up everywhere, so the amount of information that can be stored at length has changed. And artificial intelligence has removed the human limits to a lot of this. Now, if you want to collate all of that data together and get a robust picture of a human being's story, where they've been, who they've been seeing, where they might have left their DNA, if you're collecting that, all that you need to do is hand it over to the computers and let them pull it all together. So it is hard to imagine great safeguards existing. Still, we do have certain tried and true methods of making sure that somebody independent and neutral is looking at why police officers are uncovering private information. We've had the warrant requirement for centuries for most cases, right? Usually, if you've got a suspicion and you want to go trawling through somebody's privacy, you can't just do it as Lieutenant Jackson or Sergeant Jefferson. You got to go to a judge and convince them that there's a reason, get them to enter a warrant. That's not always the case. If you really have a child abduction underway, or you have a ticking time bomb and the terrorists are heading to the airport, there's always been exceptions to the warrant requirement for true emergencies. Nevertheless, normally, we expect officers to take the time, go to somebody outside the police agency, and explain why they've got good reasons for prying into sensitive information. That's what we believe the appropriate safeguard should be here, together with meaningful accountability when safeguards are overlooked and people are abused using this technology.
You know, the problem with all that is that you look what happens in the court system. Look at the FISA court. Look what happened 4 years ago with that. And in addition, if you really need these cameras are collecting data 24/7, every minute of every day. That data goes into the database. You've already documented abuses. It seems to me that in a digital age, it's impossible to protect those abuses from occurring. I understand, yes, in an emergency, ticking time bomb, an abduction, that's a valid reason to activate a system. But in essence, that's not what's going on. The recordings are going on 24/7. I have to rely on the honesty of an entire judicial system, sheriff's office system, law enforcement system. I have to rely on their honesty and their integrity to do the right thing. And yet, I don't see how I can.
That's somewhere where the public deserves to have input. One of the most shocking things is how much this system has grown without any public discussion of it. I am so glad that all of a sudden over the past couple of weeks, the media is covering this and there is public debate and public airing of concerns. But the reality is, for years and years, this stuff has been installed and deployed without oversight. My state, South Carolina, requires people to go to the Department of Transportation and get a sign off before they put any kind of device monitoring the roadway. South Carolina's head of transportation came out a while ago and said, this was never done for these devices. Law enforcement asked for them, but we never signed off on this. And unfortunately, a number of the companies in this space are not being good citizens, allowing for that debate to happen. Just as this is getting off the ground, there's been pushback. There's been a number of law enforcement agencies that have started monitoring social media accounts that are skeptical of this kind of technology. Flock's CEO actually called DFlock, which tracks these systems throughout the country, a domestic terrorist organization. He did back down, but only after a lot of pushback from folks in the media. This is a concern. In addition to having to worry about imperfect people, like you said, you've got imperfect technology. Dr. Dan, there was actually a burglary ring not long ago that managed to hack into one of the law enforcement databases for this stuff. They found out when people were going to be on the other side of town having dinner and timed break-ins with that. This stuff is not perfect. And you're right, a warrant is not the only answer. We think it's a constitutionally required one, but the public deserves to be debating this as well and demanding that lawmakers set limits on this kind of technology.
So once again, it comes down to this: people who are willing to give up a little bit of freedom for security, as Benjamin Franklin obviously warned about. And the problem with that is that with this system, once you give it up, it is given up. It is not like having the police have a search warrant and going through your house. It's like the police going through your having a search warrant or not having a search warrant, going through your house with a video camera and then posting it all on Facebook, which is basically what this system does. In other words, even if they had a warrant, let's say, but here they don't. And everything that is picked up on these cameras is available to the public through the police, which is, I guarantee you, these systems, the flock system and the sheriff's office system and the like, they're like sieves. They're like information sieves. They can be hacked in a millisecond. Nowadays, there are people who hack into everything. So basically, like I said, it's like the police taking a video camera in your house and then posting it on Facebook. How do you ever protect the population against that?
Well, we believe there's 3 pressure points that are really important. Number 1, recording. What is being recorded, when, under what circumstances? So some jurisdictions have said, you know what, we're going to legally limit these to only collecting tolls. That's all they can do is, yeah, if you cross into the toll lane without having paid, we'll send you a ticket in the mail. But that's all that we're going to use these cameras for. So there are ways to build policies that limit what's being recorded. Number two is retention. How long are you holding on to this data? A fair number of agencies actually limit how long they save this stuff for 30 days, unless they have some special reason for it. Within 30 days, you should have some sense of whether there's something that you need to preserve because, yeah, there was a car crash, there was a kidnapping, there's some sort of reason for it. Other agencies don't do that. So South Carolina's law enforcement division, until quite recently, was saving everything for 3 years, which is extraordinary. And that, to me, is absolutely an opportunity to just go back and look at the person and find a crime after the fact. That is deeply, deeply concerning. The third main pressure point is access. Who gets to access these under what circumstances? So once you have a contract in place with Flock, do you need a supervisor to sign off? Well, if you do, they have to be somehow independent. They're certainly not a neutral magistrate in most places. Is it a judge? Like you said, even that's not a perfect solution, but it's a little bit better. Flock just came forward after a lot of this bad news over the past week and said, we're going to put in new safeguards. Now we're going to require you to have a case number and some description of a law enforcement activity that you enter in on the keyboard before you get access to this stuff. But already a watchdog found that they were able to get information by just putting da as the law enforcement reason. So it's not enough. There do need to be much more robust laws around this, in addition to the public's choice of whether or not this technology is even worth it in the first place. And then, of course, we can get on my hobby horse, which is people need the ability to sue when the government abuses this power. And with qualified immunity and the sorts of legal barriers there are to holding government accountable, it's going to be almost impossible to do that.
I'm very well aware of standing to sue and all of that. And you're right, suing the government, unless they agree to be sued, is extremely difficult. But what about suing them on a constitutional basis? The Fourth Amendment is very, very clear. If I'm driving down the street and the police department is recording my license plate, my car, the dents, the scrapes, the bumper stickers, who's driving the car, and if anyone is in that car with me. If they're recording all that, to me, that's an illegal search. They are searching without any valid reason to do so. Is there not a constitutional basis to prevent the system from being activated?
We do believe it's a search, and we do believe that it requires a warrant as a result. There's a couple different ways of thinking about what counts as a search. The Supreme Court actually just gave us some good news recently in a case called Chattree, where it said that your location data off your phone, even if it's just a short period of time at issue, if the government is going to pry into that, that is sensitive and it is protected by the Constitution. So the police need a warrant before they can request that Google or your cell phone company hand over that information. That's a great start for being able to push back and say, hey, look, if your location data from your cell phone is sensitive, so too should be your data going about your business if you're being recorded by a Flock camera system or these ALPRs. Another way to think about a search is to get back down to basics. At the time of the founding, a search just meant some intentional effort to uncover or reveal something hidden. We have asked the Supreme Court to take that definition seriously, the definition the founders would have been familiar with, and use that to determine what counts as a search. And then you just look, is this the kind of thing that's hidden? Your location at all times when you're out in public? And the answer is yes. I know that oftentimes people will say, well, you're out in public, people can see you anyways. Dr. Dan, if I followed you around Western North Carolina, recording your every motion over the course of weeks or months, you would sue me. and you'd be on good grounds for invasion of privacy. You'd be able to possibly get me charged with stalking you, right? The law does protect the sum total of all of your public locations over a long period of time. So we believe that that does mean that it's a search when the government uncovers that sort of information. That at the very least, by the time somebody's trying to access that data, yes, that is a search for constitutional purposes.
Well, in actuality, if I remember correctly, when our founding fathers wrote that, they were thinking of how the British would have these kind of general search warrants, so the soldiers, the British soldiers, could come into your house just for no reason and turn it upside down and look, see what was in it, because they were obviously looking for people who were anti-British, anti-monarchy, but they were able to do this with these kind of generalized searches. Our founders didn't want that, did they?
No, colonial justice was dragnet justice. Somebody out there would issue a general warrant or a writ of assistance, and what it would say is, we suspect that there's crime afoot. Go find it. Go get it. Tear apart houses, go look through drawers, bust open chests, seize documents, go find the crime. We've got concerns about this person or about this property, figure out what's wrong. One of the most underappreciated parts of the Fourth Amendment, and I don't think it was actually in the excerpt you quoted earlier, but there's language in there about the need to particularly describe the place to be searched. The reason that we have that is to say that you have to specify where our officer is going to look and for what. It's not just, hey, I think John or Jane might be up to something, so go search their stuff until you figure it out. Rather, it's got to be, I have probable cause that this crime is occurring. I believe that there's evidence of it in this specific place. Do I have permission to intrude upon the privacy somebody would otherwise enjoy?
Well, and of course, that is exactly the opposite of what flock cameras do. They are invading your privacy 100% of the time that you're in the area of any flock camera. So it is a vague, generalized search that they are doing on your vehicle, your person, and your personal property, is it not?
Two things I want to add. First of all, you're certainly correct, but we're talking a lot about Flock, and Flock is the biggest player in this space. They've got the cutesy name. They're the subject of a lot of the public scrutiny. They are not the only business in the game. And I want to make it clear, these aren't all problems with just Flock's business model or their corporate leadership. Another big company here is Axon, which does a lot of the body cameras for law enforcement. They've moved into this market space as well. We've got the same concerns, whatever the name is that you're going to slap on it. Secondly, we're talking a lot about roadways and about motorists, and it's true, automated license plate readers are a big part of this, but it's not all that these companies do. Flock actually had a scandal recently with an indoor camera that they were operating. It was on a private business. During a sales demonstration, they said, look what we can do. And they flipped on a live feed from one of their cameras inside the changing room at a children's gym. Now, Dr. Dan, that is not a police contract that they had, but that to me is deeply concerning about, yes, once you collect this data and once you authorize it to be everywhere, you never know how it's going to be misused. Fortunately, no children were actually captured by that demonstration, but the person who saw it was aghast that this is a capacity that they have at any given time.
Well, there's no question that any recording devices can be misused, and so that just feeds into the general problem that if you are recording data 24/7, you are undoubtedly invading the privacy of people and putting them in many cases in danger. So I don't see why a constitutional fight could not be raised, or a constitutional question of the constitutionality should not be raised.
We're good Americans, and we've been raising the question, but we're good Americans, right? We protect the rights of the accused and those who are under suspicion so that we protect all of us. We don't violate our own rights in order to get at those that we suspect of doing wrong. We've had too much experience knowing that who's under suspicion can change at any given time. We've got too much of a sense that rights are only as good as they are for the least among us. And that is absolutely an important constitutional principle. To go back to one of your earlier questions, though, what do you do when the government violates these rights? It is really hard to sue the government. There's a doctrine out there called qualified immunity. So the law says that if a government official violates your rights, if a state or local official violates your rights, you can bring a federal civil rights lawsuit against them. And Section 1983, the law just says they shall be liable. The courts have made up this doctrine called qualified immunity, which says that they get a free pass if the law wasn't clearly established. Now you might say, look, the law's been clearly established since we put it in the Constitution in 1787. I don't know what would be clearer legally than the Fourth Amendment. But what the Supreme Court has said that means is a narrow set of binding precedent concerning similar circumstances. What that means is if you're the first official violating somebody's rights in a unique way, you usually get off the hook. And let me tell you, with this technology being so new and evolving so quickly, it means it's going to be very, very hard for people to turn around and sue for its misuse. I think of a woman named Amber Newell. She was on the news the other day. She's been pulled over twice at gunpoint because of a glitch in automated license plate readers. I don't know whether it's mistaking a C for a G or an O for a 0 or what it's doing. But twice now she's been stopped because there's a vehicle in their database. It's not hers. She's not the concern. But at this point, she said her kids are afraid to get in the car without asking, are we going to get pulled over by the police again this time? She should be able to sue for the violation of her rights. But under current law, she can't, and that's wrong.
Well, what do you suggest? I mean, here we have a situation. You've just mentioned a case which there's nothing malicious about it. It's an error, and all digital devices are subject to error. Maybe a little speck of dirt on the license plate makes a C into a 6 or whatever. So it's not malicious there. But here's a woman whose life has been, I wouldn't say ruined, but certainly made difficult and unpleasant because of an error. She should have some method for fixing this.
Absolutely. The Texas Supreme Court just had an interesting case. The police were pursuing a dangerous fugitive. He was on the run, he was armed, and he fled on private property. Police came in and did what, candidly, they had to do. They destroyed a lot of the house in order to get this guy. And indeed, they found him dead inside. They then refused to compensate the homeowner, who said, look, I understand that you did the right thing, but my drywall's blasted through. You put flashbangs into my living room. I can't live. This house is ruined. And what am I supposed to do with this? In fact, her insurance policy had an exception for damage caused by the government. So she couldn't even go and get insurance coverage for this. The Texas Supreme Court said there are certain costs that it is fair for the public to bear. It's not the police were at fault here. It's just, it's not fair for this woman to bear the expense of what she suffered. And that's what I would say about the Amber Newells of the world too, is these are the kinds of things, if we're going to have this technology, then the government needs to take responsibility for the harms that flow from them. Just like if Pizza Hut is going to put souped up cars out there going faster than they need to be on the roads, you sue Pizza Hut when you get into the crash, right? And that impacts Pizza Hut's decision of what policies and technology they want to use. There was an actual lawsuit about the promise of a free pizza within 15 minutes because somebody got plowed by a car that was trying to deliver that pizza quick enough so that they wouldn't have to pay the customer's money back. Pizza Hut stopped that offer because of the lawsuit. It wasn't worth it, right? Once you take the costs and you make the person responsible for them bear them, well, that factors into their thinking about these things. That's how things should work with the government too.
Well, I think that most Americans have an expectation that they will get redress of grievances, redress of harm to some degree. There's some kind of we have a fairness. I would call it a fairness doctrine, and of course, I know there is a fairness doctrine. It has to do with something else, but there is a sort of sense that if you get harmed, you should be able to get that harm taken care of in a legal way. If you're harmed in a malicious way or illegal way, of course, not in any other way. But that does also really pertain to the government, doesn't it? They just can't go around like a bull in a china closet, in a china shop and break everything up and then say, oh, well, tough luck.
So it used to be a legal rule that where there's a right, there's a remedy. Because without a remedy, there's hardly a right at all, right? What good is a right if you don't have a way of getting compensated or deterring somebody from violating it, taking the steps that they need to in order to respect you? That was classically the understanding of judges and courts. That's not the case anymore. The Supreme Court has eaten away again and again and again in this case called Bivens. Bivens was this case brought by a guy named Webster Bivens, whose Fourth Amendment rights were violated by a number of narcotics agents. And he sued. The government said, there's no statute, there's no law that's been enacted that says that you get money if we violate your Fourth Amendment rights, so we're not going to pay you. What the courts said was, look at the language of the Fourth Amendment, like you said. It says that the right to be safe against unreasonable searches and seizures shall be protected, but you shall have that right. So they said, well, we've got a way of remedying rights violations, damages. Same thing we do when people sue each other for a car crash or for a slip and fall, right? We've got a way to do this that the law has always recognized. Fast forward a couple of decades, now the Supreme Court's tune is, we're just a court. We're not the lawmakers. We're not Congress. So we're not in a position to make the government have to pay. If the lawmakers decide that the government should be responsible, if the people who collect the money and decide how it's spent decide that they want to spend some on people whose rights are violated, then they can pass a statute to do that. But in the absence of that, you're out of luck. You don't have a cause of action. Bivens has been narrowed over and over again. There's like 2 or 3 kinds of cases that you can bring for a violation nowadays and still sue under Bivens. And the Supreme Court's being asked to revisit it, maybe to narrow it yet again this coming term. That's concerning. The Constitution doesn't say that your rights will be protected as long as Congress gets around to doing something about them. It says that your rights against unreasonable searches and seizures shall be protected. To me, that's a perfectly clear instruction to the courts. The conversation we should be having is, have lawmakers done anything that's an equivalent to money damages where we don't need those anymore? I'll tell you right now, they haven't. So people should still be able to sue.
This is kind of an interesting thing. The First Amendment obviously gave us the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. And I understand that in the beginning, people could actually go to Congress with a grievance and say, here, you did this to me, you got to pay me back for that. And then they passed the 11th Amendment, which sort of did away with that. They didn't want people parading before them. But there is that concept that we should be able to petition the government for a redress of grievances and have someone actually listen and be fairly compensated when the government is at fault. And I think that we do need to make whatever changes are necessary so that can occur.
We do need to make changes. The 11th Amendment's text is geared toward a pretty narrow circumstance about people in one state suing people from another state and state governments. It's been interpreted, you're right, as a much broader sort of immunity doctrine. But look, if the people are sovereign, and that is the whole idea right here, is that we're a country where the people are sovereign, then that raises questions about this whole idea of sovereign immunity, where the government gets to violate your rights and then not do anything about it. I looked at the text of the Declaration of Independence again a couple weeks ago, America's 250th birthday and all. So many of the complaints that the colonists had against King George were about how he set up a special system for the government. They got their own courts. They got special treatment under the laws. They could, according to the colonists, even get away with murder without having to answer for it. Over and over again, the complaint is, look, we've got a rule of law. Why is it not being equally applied? Why do the same rules that govern my conduct with you in private as private citizens not apply to the government? I can't help but think that Thomas Jefferson would be aghast that we've recreated all of those abuses through our own court systems today.
I think there's no question our founders would be spinning in their graves over what's happened. I am a textualist when it comes to the Constitution. Those are words that were written down. If you have any question about what they mean, get a dictionary that was written in 1790. The meaning of the words were clear. And here now we have latter-day jurists of some questionable character telling us what these great men who wrote the Constitution had in their mind. And they have no idea. That's why the words are what really means something. That's what I believe.
It's remarkable to me that you have a lot of justices now who identify as textualists and as originalists, and not just justices, judges throughout the entirety of the judiciary. Justice Kagan said during her confirmation that we're all textualists now, right? The terms of the debate have shifted onto history and text in a really serious way. And yet, so many of those judges who are the loudest and proudest about textualism and originalism have no problem with a rule like qualified immunity, which the courts made up, because they said that as a policy matter, they were concerned about the government being sued too often. Not because this was a descendant of older legal rules, not because this was somehow reflected in the text that Congress enacted or that was ratified into the Constitution, but based on the same kind of armchair judicial philosophizing and social science and policy decisions that this court has no problem taking to task in any other area. But somehow, when it comes to holding the government accountable, putting it on an equal playing field with the citizens, whoa, that's a place where textualism and originalism just won't do.
Right, and that's a problem, because what is happening is we have departed from the meaning of those words. And like you said, Second Amendment shall not be infringed. I mean, that is about as clear a four-word phrase as I have ever heard. If those rights shall not be infringed, everything that has been done to curtail or abolish or amend the Second Amendment rights is really unconstitutional. And fortunately for us, a lot of the cases have affirmed that very thing. The Second Amendment is extremely important, because without it, the rest of the words are, I shouldn't say meaningless, but the Second Amendment helps them remain meaningful.
In 16 days, we're headed back to the Supreme Court with another friend of the court brief in the Viramontes case, which your listeners may know is the upcoming challenge to AR-15 bans in Cook County, Illinois, and in the state of Connecticut. We're going to be arguing that this whole debate over whether AR-15s are civilian arms for sport or military arms is misguided. Look, the Second Amendment was designed to protect the general militia. That meant every free citizen's interest in keeping small arms as part of a deterrent to tyranny and the ability to resist oppression should it come. That is what the original meaning of the Second Amendment was. It's not that the Second Amendment means you have whatever it would take nowadays to win a modern war. You don't get to keep a Minuteman ballistic missile in your backyard just because they were Minutemen at the time of the founding. Nevertheless, small arms of the sort that were suitable for militia service back then and nowadays are actually part of the heart of what the Second Amendment is all about. Self-defense is really important too. That was a long-established legal right at common law. It was clearly important to the founders as well, but so was this idea of collective self-defense, of all of us as a populace being able to hold on to our constitutional liberty with the use of small arms. For all the folks who believe nowadays that that's hopeless, that the government's got aircraft and tanks and missiles and all these things. I mean, just look at the last half century. Small arms and dedicated militias have done a lot. Sometimes really bad things, but certainly very effective things on the battlefield. Semi-automatic rifles, semi-automatic firearms, they've been around throughout the history of this country. It's true, obviously, there's been technological developments with these things, but on the frontiers, throughout the founding of this country, certainly by the time of the mid-1800s and the 14th Amendment, these were arms that were in common use. It's not like fully auto machine guns, which came about later on, and which were not only never really in civilian use, but even in the military. They're not standard issue for your average foot soldier. Your average foot soldier doesn't get grenades and bazookas and fully automatic machine guns, right? But a lot of those are reserved, heavy machine guns are reserved for specialist troops. But something like the AR-15, a functional, portable rifle suited for infantry use, that's exactly what the Second Amendment is meant to protect. And I'm so glad that the Supreme Court is not waiting 20 years to weigh in on this as more and more states are considering restrictions. I'm glad they're going to be hearing a case now.
Well, the 1911 was invented in 1911, and that's well over 100 years ago. So, but again, I mean, these are just some examples of how people in the government who feel they need to control our lives are ignoring the written words of the Constitution. And that's where that quote of Zuby really comes into play, because most of the people that I know just want to be left alone, live their lives. I think live and let live is a valid way of approaching life. The problem is there are lots of people around who don't agree, who think they have the right to control my life or control the way you live. Of course, that means they don't want us to control them. They want to control us. That is not how you get along with other people.
Toleration and pluralism are a recipe for civil peace, right? That's the whole aim here, is that we're not going to fight about things that we can disagree about, we can debate, we can argue about. And we're not going to bring in the government to settle every debate, even the most important ones. They're going to be left to conscience and to persuasion, and that's a really important thing. When we're talking about flock cameras, I brought up earlier on in our conversation tonight how in 2012, the NYPD went after a whole bunch of mosques and used these to track who was attending for worship services and to pray. Who's in the government spotlight at any given time is going to change, right? This year, it might be the immigration activists and the folks with the coexist bumper stickers on the back of their car. Give it 2 years, it might be the folks with the NRA stickers on the back of their car, right? Unfortunately, the tendency is often to focus on defending my rights because I don't want to fall under the scope of the government, rather than defending the rights themselves and standing up when you see somebody who you may have differences with, or you may even disagree with on a lot of things. But when they are the person who's being targeted, if you don't stand up and help defend their rights too, then those rights are the ones that ultimately pay the price. They become weaker when they just become these pawns, and how strong they are as applied to whom just depends on who's in office.
That's a very profound and very important statement. Matthew, because it really is true. A right, and this is the constitutional rights I'm talking about. I talk about natural law rights. Natural law rights and constitutional rights are very specific, and everyone should benefit equally from them, whether you agree or not. So both sides of the coin really matter. And if you don't let both sides of the coin matter, only your side of the coin, that's where these disagreements arise. So I think that what you said is very important for people to understand that a constitutional right applies equally to everybody.
If somebody could use the same excuse to take away your rights if they really wanted to, then guess what? It's not a very persuasive justification, and it's not principled to use it as a reason to argue against somebody else's liberty.
So, Matthew, we've had an interesting discussion. Do you want to sum it up for us?
The proliferation of these surveillance technologies throughout the country has happened without public scrutiny. The American people can do this. We can stand up. Viewers might remember a couple of months ago during the Super Bowl, there was actually an ad where Flock and the Ring doorbell systems were talking about a joint initiative called Search Party. They had a cute commercial about a runaway kitten in the neighborhood. Everybody links up their cameras and they track this kitty and ultimately find her. And there was an uproar from the public that said, look, this is the sort of invasion of privacy, the sort of combination of all of our data that we don't want. And because people protested, Flock and Ring canceled their agreement. They backed down and said, all right, if this is what the people will not abide, then we are not going to go through with it. That is the kind of precedent that we need right now. No, I am not saying people should take the law into their own hands. I'm not saying get out there with a chainsaw like some folks are and cut these things off the poles. We have democracy for a reason, because it is a peace compact. We have ways to push back, to have these conversations. Go to court, go to town hall, ask what kind of agreements your law enforcement agencies have with these companies. Ask who they're sharing the data with. Do that hard work and stand up in your communities, find other like-minded people, and get out there and help to rein this thing in. Because as it exists today, it is way too ripe for abuse. It's imperfect technology wielded by imperfect people without enough safeguards. Demand limits on what these things record, how long the data is retained for, and who gets access to them. Ask for meaningful public accountability and serious limits, and start a conversation in your community about whether this kind of technology is worth the risks involved.
Matthew Cavadon of the Cato Institute, I want to thank you very, very much for a very absolutely important and wonderful discussion of a very challenging issue, one which definitely needs to be confronted in the public square. Thank you for being a guest on Freedom Forum Live, Matthew.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dan, and thank you for the forum for creating a place where people can have these conversations.
Thank you, sir, and good night.
Good night.